What's your name? What? I'm not gonna like your name. What?
The crowd was electric, lights blazing, guitars screaming, when a single voice from the audience cut through the noise. "My name's Nicole," she shouted. Keith Urban froze. For a heartbeat, the man who'd sung 1,000 love songs stood utterly still. Then came that laugh, the kind that's half amusement, half ache. Within seconds, the clip went viral. Millions watched as the country star crumbled into a moment that felt too raw to be just a coincidence. But to those who followed his unraveling marriage to Nicole Kidman, it wasn't just a funny concert mishap. It was a confession without words. The timing, the expression, the collapse. It all seemed to expose what Keith had been trying to hide beneath tour smiles and dimmed stage lights. Was it heartbreak, regret, or the sound of a man realizing that a love he once sang about was truly gone? This wasn't just another celebrity headline. It was a moment of truth, caught live, and in the glimmer of those spotlights, the line between performer and broken husband blurred. Tonight, we uncover what that single viral moment really revealed about Keith Urban's feelings, the divorce, and the quiet pain fame can't disguise. Before the headlines, before the viral clip that broke the internet, there was a love story that seemed untouchable. When Nicole Kidman met Keith Urban in 2005 at a G-Day Australia event in Los Angeles, their chemistry was instant. Two stars from the same homeland. One, an Oscar-winning actress who had endured a painful divorce from Tom Cruise. The other, a country singer clawing his way toward international fame. Within a year, they were married in Sydney, under candlelight and whispers of forever. The world called them Australia's royal couple. Beautiful, talented, unshakable. For nearly 2 decades, their lives looked like a carefully written fairy tale. Red carpets, award speeches, quiet glances that seemed to say, "We made it." Keith often spoke of Nicole as his rock, the woman who helped him through addiction recovery and believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. Nicole, in turn, called him her safe harbor, the man who brought music and laughter back into her life. Together, they raised 2 daughters and balanced Hollywood's glare with the warmth of their Nashville home. But even the most polished smiles can hide fractures. Behind the flashbulbs, they lived in 2 different worlds. Keith on tour, city to city, Nicole on set halfway across the globe. Their schedules rarely aligned, and insiders began to notice the distance not just in miles, but in mood. He sang of devotion, she starred in films about betrayal. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Then came the subtle signs, fewer public appearances, no anniversary posts, and growing whispers that something felt off. Those who once envied their bond started to sense a quiet drift, a love still respectful, but no longer alive. By the time Keith's voice cracked on stage years later, it was clear. The fairy tale had been fading long before the world noticed. What began as a cinematic romance had slowly become a story about endurance, silence, and the heavy price of loving under a spotlight. It began with silence, the kind that doesn't arrive overnight but creeps in slowly, one unanswered message at a time. By mid-2025, that silence had grown deafening in the marriage of Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban. What the world didn't see behind their red carpet smiles was 2 people quietly drifting toward separate lives. Rumors had swirled for months. Whispers about Keith buying his own place in Nashville, about Nicole spending long stretches in Los Angeles without him. But no one expected how suddenly everything would unravel. Then came the confirmation. In late September, Nicole Kidman officially filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. The public documents were clean, polite, almost sterile. But between the lines, the story felt far more complicated. After 19 years of marriage, shared children, and countless interviews proclaiming undying love, the fairy tale had reached its breaking point. The world watched in disbelief. Yet when reporters revisited recent footage, the signs had been hiding in plain sight. On stage, Keith had already begun to shed the image of the devoted husband. Fans noticed he'd stopped wearing his wedding ring. During a show earlier that month, he replaced lyrics that once referenced Nicole with improvised lines about running from the past. Social media lit up, speculating whether this was heartbreak disguised as creativity. Some claimed he looked exhausted, distant. His performance is more raw, almost unguarded. Meanwhile, Nicole's own silence spoke volumes. Paparazzi caught her arriving at LAX alone, her hand conspicuously bare, but nothing captured captured the emotional fracture quite like that moment, the one that made millions pause mid-scroll. It happened on October 17th at a packed concert in Nashville. In the middle of a lighthearted exchange with fans, a woman shouted, "My name's Nicole." For a split second, the stage went still. Keith laughed, but it wasn't the usual charming grin. It was a tight, nervous laugh, followed by a dramatic collapse onto his knees, face buried in his hands. The crowd roared with laughter, but the moment carried an unmistakable sting. Cameras caught it all. The flicker of pain behind his eyes, the kind of reaction that only comes when humor brushes against heartbreak. Within hours, the clip went viral. Headlines screamed, "Keith Urban breaks down mid-show after fan says Nicole." TikTok users dissected the moment frame by frame, debating whether it was staged or real. To many, it felt like an emotional slip, the first unfiltered glimpse into a man whose private world had just imploded. One fan commented, "That wasn't acting, that was grief in real time." Meanwhile, backstage sources described an exhausted Keith, struggling to keep his composure as the show went on. Friends told tabloids he'd been barely holding it together since the divorce filing. Days earlier, he'd canceled a tour date in South Carolina due to vocal strain, a rare move for a perfectionist performer. Officially, it was laryngitis. Unofficially, insiders whispered that his voice wasn't the only thing breaking. Nicole, for her part, kept her distance from the spectacle. Reports surfaced that she was focusing on her daughters and upcoming projects, refusing to engage in the growing tabloid storm. But even her silence became fuel for speculation. Some outlets suggested she felt blindsided by Keith's decision, while others claimed she'd been emotionally absent for years. The truth, as always, lay somewhere in the shadows, where marriages die quietly, far from cameras. Then came the details that made the divorce sting even deeper. Legal filings revealed that Nicole would be the primary residential parent, with the children spending most of the year in her care. Neither party requested spousal support, a sign of two people who were emotionally done, not just legally separating. Yet what caught fans off guard was how swiftly the process moved, as if both sides had been preparing for this end long before the public knew. For Keith Urban, that viral Nicole moment became symbolic, not just of a marriage lost, but of a man realizing the story he'd been living in was over. The onstage fall wasn't part of the show. It was the weight of 19 years crashing down in front of thousands of witnesses. For Nicole Kidman, it was another act in a life defined by reinvention. From cruise to urban, from heartbreak to resilience, from Hollywood's ingenue to a woman reclaiming her peace. The breaking point wasn't a single explosion of anger or betrayal. It was something quieter. Distance, exhaustion. Two artists pulled apart by the gravity of fame. When Keith looked out at that audience and heard the name Nicole, it wasn't a fan he saw. It was every memory he'd been running from. The wedding vows, the laughter, the nights on the road when she stopped calling back. And as the crowd cheered, oblivious to the subtext, the camera panned across a man smiling through a storm. A performer pretending the show must go on, even as the life behind the music fell apart. In the days that followed, Keith Urban's viral Nicole moment became the defining image of their breakup. A brief flicker of vulnerability replayed millions of times. News outlets rushed to analyze every gesture, every sigh, every tremor in his voice. For the public, it was spectacle. For Keith, it was the cost of living heartbreak in the spotlight. The morning after the video spread, headlines painted him as a man on the edge, while fans flooded his comment sections with sympathy and speculation. Just 24 hours later, Keith abruptly canceled another concert, citing vocal rest. Officially, it was medical. Unofficially, it felt emotional. Behind the scenes, friends described him as exhausted and heartbroken, barely eating or sleeping as he pushed through the final stretch of his tour. The stage, once his refuge, had become a battlefield of memories. Songs written for Nicole suddenly carried too much weight to sing. Nicole, meanwhile, moved with her usual quiet grace. Paparazzi caught her walking with their daughters in Los Angeles, unbothered by questions, her expression unreadable. Sources close to her told magazines she was focusing on her children and not dwelling on regrets. She poured her energy into upcoming projects, Big Little Lies 3 and Practical Magic 2, using work as both shield and sanctuary. Still, the media storm raged. Fans split into sides. Gossip blogs speculated about Keith's friendship with his young guitarist Maggie Baugh, and interviewers dissected every new lyric or wardrobe change for hidden meaning. Yet, beneath the noise, a quieter truth lingered. Two people who once defined devotion were now learning how to live apart. By the end of that week, the laughter from the concert had faded. In its place was a collective hush, the realization that what began as a viral joke had revealed something heartbreakingly real. When the laughter died down, what remained wasn't embarrassment. It was truth. Keith Urban's reaction on that stage wasn't the reflex of a performer caught off guard. It was the release of someone who'd been holding too much in for too long. For nearly 2 decades, he and Nicole Kidman had built their lives as an image of balance, passion and poise, fame and family. But what we saw in that split second of collapse was the unraveling of a man who had finally run out of ways to pretend everything was fine. Fame often demands that pain be disguised as professionalism. For Keith, the stage had always been his safest place, a controlled environment where emotion was art, not evidence. Yet that night, control slipped. The name Nicole wasn't just a word shouted by a fan. It was the echo of everything unresolved: love, regret, exhaustion, and maybe even guilt. His laugh, his fall to the floor, his attempt to brush it off. It was all part of a human struggle between hiding and healing. Nicole's silence tells another story, one of endurance. For years, she played the role of protector, standing by Keith through addiction recovery, long tours, and media storms. But love built on constant repair can quietly turn into fatigue. The woman who once rescued him from his darkest days may have finally realized that she couldn't keep saving someone who no longer wanted to be saved. Her composure now isn't coldness, it's survival. Their divorce, stripped of scandal, becomes a portrait of emotional erosion, a slow undoing under the pressure of distance and image. And in that sense, the viral moment wasn't humiliation, it was honesty. It was the first time Keith stopped performing and simply felt. Because in every love story that ends, there's a moment when words fail, when laughter becomes confession, and silence says everything. For Keith and Nicole, that moment just happened to unfold beneath the glare of stage lights, with the world watching. In the weeks that followed, the whirlwind refused to calm. The viral clip had transformed from a passing curiosity into a cultural talking point, the perfect symbol of a public breakup disguised as a performance. Everywhere Keith Urban went, cameras followed, waiting for another slip, another sign that fame's golden couple had truly fallen apart. But Keith said little. His silence, punctuated by weary smiles during brief public appearances, spoke louder than any interview could. The divorce filings became public record. No spousal support, shared custody, and a clear parenting schedule that left Nicole with most of the family time. It was clean, efficient, almost too calm for a love once so intense. Fans tried to read meaning into every gesture. The missing ring, the new songs about regret, the sudden on-stage apologies. When Keith dedicated a performance to everyone learning how to let go, it felt like a farewell, not to his audience, but to her. Meanwhile, Nicole moved forward with quiet resolve. Her first public appearance post-filing showed her composed and radiant, her hands resting on her daughter's shoulders as paparazzi shouted Keith's name. She didn't flinch. Insiders claimed she'd made peace with the end, telling friends she felt liberated, not bitter. For her, closure wasn't about speaking out. It was about reclaiming normalcy in a world that had turned their marriage into a headline. But even as both seemed to move on, the world wouldn't let them forget. Social media users continued dissecting the Nicole moment, analyzing every second of Keith's expression as though it held a hidden code. In truth, the meaning was simple. It was the sound of finality. When the noise finally died down, what remained were 2 separate lives, still orbiting the same memories. Proof that even the most beautiful stories can end not with betrayal, but with quiet acceptance. Under the dim light of the empty stage, the echoes of applause fade into silence. The spot where Keith Urban once stood, laughing, trembling, breaking, is now just wood and dust. But for those who watched that moment, something lingered. It wasn't about celebrity gossip or viral clicks. It was about watching a man's carefully built world crumble in real time. Not with anger, but with quiet sorrow. For nearly 2 decades, Keith and Nicole embodied the illusion of perfect love. Proof that fame and devotion could coexist. Yet, in the end, the same spotlight that celebrated them also exposed them. That single word, Nicole, shouted from the dark, became a mirror reflecting everything they'd lost. Intimacy, trust, and the comfort of being known without pretense. Fame can disguise pain, but it can't silence it. And sometimes, the truth doesn't come in a press release or interview. It arrives in a single, unguarded moment that no one can rehearse. Their story began in front of cameras, and it ended there too, not with scandal, but with silence. And maybe that's the real tragedy of love in the spotlight. When the music stops, all that's left is the echo of what was once real.